Hello everyone, my name is Stonesy Boy and welcome back to Stonesy Reads, or Reading with Stonesy. Today we are reading one of my favorite books, Minecraft the Voyage, and you might be questioning why we're not doing 1 to 20. Well, the thing with these Minecraft books is they don't go by every 20 pages or by every so many chapters. They go by the different pages and such, or they go by different chapters of their own. I could say we read 2 chapters a book, but I don't know if that one would work very well. In this story at least. How many chapters are there? That should be the first question I ask. Because if there's an odd number, then maybe we can get away with that. That just means sometimes we're reading like 32 chapters. That just means sometimes we're reading like 10 pages, and other times we're reading barely any pages. Like, for example, chapter 31 starts at 272, and of course ends at 288. Which is barely any pages at all. And I'd rather we finish this book in 14 days than in, what was that, 16? I'd rather 14 to 16, even if it's a harder load. Which is why today we're reading 29 instead of 20. But tomorrow should be easy because we're reading 30 to goodness knows how many. But yeah, what a better time to start than with Chapter 1, The House by the Sea, of Stack Stonecutter and his 3 faithful companions. In a house by the sea there lived a young man. In a few minutes I'll tell you about the young man, who after all this hero is the story. This is the hero of the story. But you first thought to know something about this house, because it's important to our tale as well. The house wasn't a palace, you probably couldn't even call it a mansion, but it was big, and most people who saw it thought it was beautiful. It was built out of black and white speckled diorite, pink granite, and glass. The diorite and granite had been carefully polished, and the first rays of the morning sun made the house seem to glow, like it was lit from within. The house had been built into the side of a green hill dotted with white birches, so it looked like it was part of the landscape, instead of something artificial that was made stuck in the middle of it. And the land around the house had been carefully reshaped to make it pleasing to the eye. If you approach this house by sea, you step off your boat at the end of the broad green lawn, which are the line of birch trees that enter side. To your right, you'd find a low hill covered in flowers of every color: roses, peonies, tulips, cornflowers, daisies. To your left, beside another low hill, you'd see pens for cattle and pigs and chickens and sheep, and above them, you'd find lovingly tended rows of crops: wheat, beetroot, and carrots, and the squat squares of pumpkins and melons ahead above you. You'd see the house. You reach it, you'd pass between the white birch trees, perhaps thinking they looked like soldiers on the parade. Walk around a cheerful mountain and splash with bubbled in a square green lawn, and climb a broad flight of polished diorite steps until you stood at the front door. The young man who lived in the house named Stack Stonecutter, and he was the third in the line of stonecutters to call it home. Stack's grandmother, the first stonecutter anyone had ever heard of, had built a simple dwelling on the side of the hill many years ago, little more than a cave chopped out of dirt and rock. It was her son, Stack's father, who enlarged the house and planted the trees and flowers, made a stonecutter home an impressive estate. Stack's father and grandmother were dead now, buried alongside the rest of the family in place of honor in their back garden. Stack's lived alone, or almost alone. 3 cats lived with him: a black one with golden eyes, a gray striped one with green eyes, and a Siamese with blue eyes. They were called Coal, Emerald, and Lapis. After some of the rocks and minerals of the stonecutter family had mined from the ground over the years, Stax loved coal, emerald, and lapis, and considered them company through a happy life. In recent years, he began to talk with them, even though they offered answers beyond swishes, tails, purrs, and occasional meow. Visitors to the stonecutter estate had grown used to the coming across Stax somewhere on the grounds, planting flowers or pruning tree limbs while chatting companionably with one or more of the 3 cats, who were more often than not would be asleep in the sun. The people who lived near the stonecutter estate thought behavior was a bit strange, and then everything about Stack struck them at least a bit strange. His oldest neighbors remembered Stack's grandmother was a skilled miner who never shied from marching into a dark hole in the ground and returned weighing down the rich materials of marvelous treasures. The younger ones recalled Stack's father was a great adventurer, a smiling man who loved traveling the world and meet new people. Stack's father had loved tales, and he was ready to get at telling his own stories, and was convincing people he just met that they'd be happier if they brought a stone that the stonecutters had mined and cut into polished blocks. All of the neighbors, regardless of how old they were, agreed that Stacks was nothing like his grandmother or his father. He went to the stonecutter office every few weeks to take care of family business, but as far as anyone knew, he had never traveled through the forest or across the plains, or set out on a journey from the stonecutter boathouse to visit any of the islands his father had told such wonderful stories about. Everyone agreed Stacks was skilled at mining and cutting stone, having learned to craft from his father and grandmother, but he never expressed his interest in finding new mines and seeing what they might contain. People who went to visit Stacks at the big house by the sea said he was pleasant enough if you talked with him about cats and flowers, but if you tried to have a conversation with him about anything else, pretty soon he'd get a faraway look in his eye and start to fidget. And with a few minutes after that, he'd make some excuse, and not always convincing one, to go back into his home. This kind of neighbors felt sorry for Stacks, who became an orphan when he was just a teenager, and asked what was really wrong with being home buddy who was interested in cats and flowers and mines. Which miners should first to tell you they were always very dark, often smelly, and sometimes dangerous. But the less kind neighbors had Stacks was lucky the other members of his family had worked so hard for so many years he didn't have to work that hard at all. And as the years went by and Stacks got a little odder with each one, the less kind neighbors came to outnumber the kind ones. Now there's no way for me to know how old you are. You might be 8 or 18 or 88 or even 888. Alright, you're probably not 888. But no matter what the answer is, you know it's easy for people to be unkind about things they don't actually know about a lot about. So let me tell you about one day in Stack Stonecutter's life. The day he came to think of as the last normal day he ever had. Because it was the day before everything began to go terribly wrong. Maybe if you know about that day, what came after it, you'll be able to make up your own mind. Chapter 2. The Last Regular Day. Breakfast with the kiddies, an unwelcome visitor, duties on the estate, a job for an axe. Things are put right, however briefly. This particular day began with a sunny morning. Stacks woke up late in the upstairs bedroom that once belonged to his father, the one whose floor-to-ceiling windows were shielded from the morning sun by a bulk of the hill behind the back garden. He rubbed his sleep in his eyes and carefully lifted up Cole, who was sleeping on his chest, and then Emerald, who was sprawled across his knees. Neither cat woke up when they gently laid down amid the rumpled sheets, though Emerald gave a big yawn and stretched himself into a long, contented, furry bow. Stacks looked for Lapis and found Siamese was already awake, sitting at the foot of Stacks' bed, giving herself a bath. "Good morning, kitties," Stacks said cheerfully, which earned them a purr from Lapis and a twitch of Cole's ear. Still sleepy, Stacks put on his robe and stretched, one hand ruffling his tousled hair from the upstairs bedroom. A ladder led down from the main floor of the house, while a door opened into the balcony overlooking the back garden. Before he opened the doors into the balcony, Stacks peered into the windows, in case a zombie or spider might be lurking nearby. But he wasn't very worried. It had some time after dawn, late enough for any dangerous night creatures to have burned up or sought shelter from the sun. And the stonecutter estate was dotted with lanterns and set on diorite columns, carefully spaced to discourage evil things from approaching the house. There had been a spider lurking above the balcony one morning, one of the big ones that had a cluster of red eyes and was covered with black bristles. That had given Stacks a fright and left him out of sorts the better part of a week. When that happened, last summer, Stacks thought, though he wasn't entirely sure if it hadn't been the summer before that. This time, there was no spider or any other monstrous things to disturb the peace in the morning, just bright sunshine and a warm breeze. Reassured, Stacks left the front door open, leaned against the balcony railing, looking down into the back garden below, and he could see the edge of diorite swimming pool that his father had built, half in the sunlight, half in the shadow, cast by a ceiling of rock and dirt. The water looked cool and inviting, and Stacks decided that a dip in the pool would be an excellent way to end what he suspected would be a hot afternoon. Next to the pool, a wooden hat sat at the edge of the lush green lawn. That was the entrance to the stonecutter's richest mine, which was a deep central shaft. Farther away into the oldest birches and near a sparkling blue waterfall lay the graves of his parents and grandparents, surrounded by flowers. Stacks' eyes rose to the ridge on the far side of the back garden, and the diorite pillar that stood atop it, crowned by a brightly lit lantern, had marked the edge of the estate. Beyond it to the west was a crescent-shaped bay, fringed with a beach and thick green forest. If Stacks followed the shoreline, that a day's walk would take him past the stonecutter mine on an island offshore, and then a small house next into the side of the mountain, surrounded by scrubland and acacia trees. A no-frills outpost his father had set up in the base for raising cattle and exploring the tunnels and lava tubes beneath the mountain, furnished with a little more than a bed, furnace, chest, and crafting table. Stacks hasn't visited since he was a child. I wonder if the outpost is still there. But of course, it was. Why wouldn't anything have changed? No reason to go all that way, though, right, Lapis? Stax asked, reaching down to pet the Siamese, who was butting her head against his shins. Not when there's so much to do here, starting with you three hungry kitties' breakfast. He dressed and climbed down the ladder, emerged from the middle of the house's main floor ahead of them, though through wide wall of glass blocks lay the lawn and fountain, with a line of birches leading down to the sea. To the left was a stonecutter trophy room, and a high ceiling was next to that. A small, low-ceilinged bedroom overlooking the lawn behind him was a door to the back garden, and a combination storeroom and a workroom, with chests against one wall and furnaces, crafting tables, and looms against the other, as well as a ladder leading down to the enchanting room, another storeroom, and a pool. To Stax's right, past a cluster of couches and chairs, was another wall of glass, forming a door leading to the south lawn. Stax could just see the roof of the boathouse, tucked snugly against the hill in the sheep pen. As Stax prepared breakfast, Cole, Emerald, and Lapis all made their way down from the upstairs bedroom to twine themselves around the ankles, meowing on the verge of starvation. He prepared fish for them, sliced off a chunk of bread for himself, laddered it with honey, and ate it while inspecting the east lawn and the south lawn to the back garden. All looked as it should, which was why all looked the same as it had yesterday, and each week and month before that, except... kitties, this isn't right, said Stax. He put the half-eaten chunk of bread down at the table in the back wall. Below the frames holding the stone pickaxe and sword, climbed up the ladder to the bedroom. Then he made his way out to the balcony and stared out to the ridge. Birches crowned the top of the ridge, sprouted from the terrace slopes, and left much of the back garden in the cool shadows. That was what Stax's father had wanted. He liked the birches' white trunks and narrow, blade-like dark green leaves, and had pointed out the stacks that were bright bark marked with black whorls mimicked the diorite walls of the house, making the back garden and the lawn feel like a continuation of the stonecutter home, rather than something separate from it. But now Stax saw clear that he thought he glimpsed downstairs, where it was nothing great shade of green peeking out among the birch leaves at the top of the ridge, below it a hint of dark wood. Now, how did I miss that? He asked himself, having forgotten that Cole, Emerald, and Lapis were still downstairs, happily reducing their fish breakfast to bones. An oak tree has grown up into the view. We can't have that now, can we? What would Father say? Stax stood in the balcony for some time, first considering the oak tree, then carefully scanning the ridge of the hills around the back garden, in case some other invader had escaped had his attention, but all else as it should be. Well, that's it then, Stax said. We'll have to revise the day's to-do list. But he didn't head out to deal with the tree right then, or indeed for the next few hours. Instead, he wandered the shore of the estate, taking a moment to peer out of the icebergs in the distance and whacked away at the stray tufts of long grass. He wondered if the flowers on the low hill would be more attractive if he mixed in some lilacs for more color. Or perhaps he should reshape the hill completely, making it symmetrical and creating terraces for planting. Stax decided reshaping the hill was too big of a job for one day, particularly such a hot one, but promised himself he would consider the idea again in a few weeks. He checked in on the cows and the chickens, gathering milk and eggs for the larder, and finished the rounds by hopping the fence to stand amid in the stonecutter flock of sheep, which included white ones, but also ones with red, yellow, blue, and orange wool. He must have left the door in the house open behind him for a while as he sheep penned. The cats joined them and alternated between purring and mewing for a second for attention. I think we need a purple sheep, Stax said, eyeing the red and blue sheep munching grass in the corner. Do you think so, kitties? And the estate needs to be sheep of every color, after all. Cole chose that moment to meow, and Stax shook his head. Dye a white sheep purple? Well, we could do that, I suppose, but a more proper to do it the natural way, don't you think? Anyway, I'm not sure if we have any purple dye in the storeroom. The more Stax thought about it, the more he was sure he was correct. They had no purple dye. He knew he could find the recipe for purple dye in one of his father's books in the enchanting room down by the pool. That reminded him of a swim, which seemed like a peasant activity, break up a hot afternoon. The sun was midway down the sky, but it was still uncomfortably humid, with no sign of rain. And looking at the sky reminded Stax once again of the oak tree that had grown up where it hadn't belonged. He vaulted back over the fence, thinking grandmother wouldn't have approved of taking such a shortcut instead of using the gate. This time he made certain to shut the door of the house behind him, though Lapis, as usual, had to take her time deciding whether or not she wanted to come in. It was nice and cool in the storeroom, and Stax's resolve wavered as he mopped his brow. That oak tree still will only be a tiny bit taller tomorrow, he told Emerald, who would be curled up on a furnace, who looked ready for another nap. The gray striped cat closed his eyes, contentedly yawned, and began licking between his toes. Oh, I suppose you're right, Stack said. Hard day today means leisure tomorrow, Wonder where I heard that. Certainly not something father or grandmother would have said. Hard work today, more hard work tomorrow. That sounds like them now, doesn't it? The tool chest opened with a wheeze of hinges, revealing its carefully arranged contents, swords and axes next to shovels and hoes. There was stacks of armors and quivers and arrows and coils of bowstrings. Pairs of shears sat next to the compasses and planks and exotic wood brought back from Stax's father's expeditions. Stax selected the diamond-bladed axe, testing its edge and quickly pulling back his finger. He slung the axe over his shoulder, giving Emerald a compatible ear rub, and headed for the back door. He thought that removing the diamond chestplate or at least the diamond helmet and armor stand in the trophy would, but immediately decided against it. He hadn't sighted a creeper on the ridge for many months. The day he was oppressively hot as it was, and surely the axe would be sufficient protection against unexpected hazard. Though an axe wouldn't be the right tool for that job, now would it? He asked Cole, who was trotting across the lawn next to him, tail headed high. Grandmother would have a fit. Stax glanced guiltily at the shady place in the garden where the stone-covered gravestone stood. But a few minutes later he was climbing to the top of the ridge, peering up at the sun, which was now bare nearing the horizon. There was an oak tree ahead, a young tree, only recently grown from the sapling to fight its way through the shade and birches and stretch its limbs to the sun. Wrong place for you, I'm afraid, Stack said apologetically, giving the young oak a little pat, looking to make sure Cole had chosen a safe distance for snoozing. He swung the axe at the oak's trunk, a deep, heavy whack echoing off the hill and the gleaming white and pink walls of the house. A few strokes and he had hewn the tree through, allowing him to take aim at its limbs and leaves, until he was standing on a stump, sweating freely now, surrounded by leaf litter and debris. There's a good day's work done, Stack told Cole, whose answer was to stretch a little farther in search of the sun. Stax hopped off the oak stump, cut it down, and began to gather the wood he chopped, whistling cheerfully into the place where the oak had stood and cleaned the meat. Maybe it was his imagination, but Stax thought he could already see the grass growing over another bare patch on the ground. The sun was now touching a distant hills to the west, and it left light left the placid surface of the sea, rippled with a pink and orange. The shadows now crept across the back garden toward the cheerful lights of the house. I guess we'll make it an evening swim then, said Stax, stirring his axe. Before his swim, he fed the cats, added to the oak house's supply of timber, returned the diamond axe to its proper place in the storeroom. He thought about taking one of his father's swords with him out to the pool, but decided against it. The back garden was well lit, and unlikely of any trouble. The doors out of the enchanting room was just a quick dash away. And so, Stax snoozed idly in the pool, his elbows up to the polished diorite, while the cats played in the garden, and the stars wheeled overhead. And, as he predicted, no trouble found him. It was the last night he'd be able to say that. Chapter 3. The Visitor. An unexpected caller, a tour of the estate, unwelcome questions were asked and reluctantly answered, into the mine, a promise of more company. Stax should have known a visitor was trouble when he came to the wrong dock. Visitors who had business with Stax knew to land their boats at the end of the lawn, in the shallow cove. Stax's father had carefully squared off such arrivals. This left Stax see that visitors had arrived, but it also showed off the estate at its best. Before conducting business, visitors would walk between the lines of the birches, past the fountain, and ascend the diorite stairs. Everyone arriving on business knew that, because of course they didn't come unannounced. They would go to the stonecutter mining office first, speak to someone there, and that the person would hurry off to the estate and tell Stax of the new arrival. That was the way it had been done in his father's time. It had worked well then, and Stax could see no reason for anything to change. The visitor came unannounced too. So it was that Stax was finishing breakfast in the house and explaining to Emerald that no, he couldn't have another cod, when he spotted a boat made of dark wood approaching the southern shore. What is this now, kiddies? He asked, mildly annoyed, and looking across the lawn to see another boat was arriving in the cove, where it belonged, but there was nothing there. What's this? Stax asked again, as the boat neared the little family dock of the person inside shipped as oars. He was definitely going to land. What a bother, said Stax, checking to see if his robe was cleaning, and deciding if it was clean enough. What a bore. He was still muttering variations of his open south door. He got to inconvenience and imposition while pulling on his right shoe, started across the lawn. The sheep, not used to seeing him at that hour, offered bleats and baas of curiosity, or at least as close as sheep could get to being curious about things. The hill fell away to the water in the south, and the west side of the sheep pen and the west side of Stack's father had built a trim little boathouse of birch, With a dock extending out into the water, it was Stack's favorite place on the estate. Many mornings, he and the cats liked to eat breakfast out on the dock, after which the cats and sometimes Stax would enjoy a brief snooze. Sandstone steps led down to the water in the south lawn, and as Stax strode down from the visitor stepped out of the boat and turned to face him. He was slim and not much older than him, Stax with bright blue eyes, and was always in motion. Jumping from Stax to Bow House and the larger house on the top hill, something struck Stax as odd. The visitor was wearing a suit of mismatched armor, a gold chestplate above diamond leggings and leather boots, and his clothes were a riot of clashing colors and looked like they didn't fit. Some of his garments were too small, to the point of looking uncomfortably tight, while others were baggy and saggy. The diamond sword hung from his hip, but his belt was too big, and he kept hitching it up as he took his surroundings. "Good morning," Stax said, remembering he could be polite before shooing the visitor away. "I'm sorry, I'm afraid I must have forgotten our appointment, Mr. "Oh, we didn't have an appointment," the man said with a smile that struck Stax as faintly mocking. "Boring things, appointments. I go where I want, when I want, and now I'm here." That sounded faintly rude, and Stax didn't like it. His father probably would have turned it into a joke, and then his father loved visitors and meeting new people. At some point, while living alone, Stax had decided he wasn't fond of either. Or rather, he wasn't quite decided that starting acting as if he had. Until they become one and the same thing, that can happen of people who spend too long with only themselves for company. I'm afraid it had happened to Stax. So instead of making a joke or turning the conversation somewhere different, Stax stared at the new arrival and crossed their arm over his chest. "And your business is?" he asked. "You might call me a collector," the man said, his eyes studying the house with the ancient blue gaze of experiences. "I don't see how experiences can be collected," Stax said. Now the man laughed, a bawling guffaw that went on an uncomfortably long time. "I'm sure you don't, Stax Stonecutter," he said. Stax had made up his mind he didn't like this unannounced visitor, and it was highly reassuring that the man knew Stax's name. That suggested that he at least had some reason for arriving on the dock. He tried to think of how his father would have handled the situation. "You have me at a disadvantage," Stax said. "You know my name, and I'm afraid I don't know yours." "That's because I haven't said it. But since we're getting so well acquainted, it's time I did. Fueg Tempero, at your service." And Fueg Tempero gave Stax a low bow, then looked up with a grin that struck Stax as suddenly similar to the look of a predator that might give a particularly plump meal. And what did that mean that they were going to be well acquainted? Stax reluctantly decided his father would have treated this Fueg Tempero like any other potential business partner, even though he had arrived unannounced and misbehaving strangely, even rudely. "Never let a poor first impression get in the way of turning a profit," his father had said. Or at least, that sounded like something he might have said. Stax didn't like the idea. What he most wanted to do was order the man to go away at this minute, but he forced himself to behave the way that he thought his father would have. "Well, now that we know each other, how can I help you, Mr. Tempero?" Stax asked. "By giving me a tour of your home," Fueg said. "It's an impressive property. You must have worked very hard to make it what it is." "Well, yes," Stax said. That is, my father did most of the work, to be honest. My job was more keeping things running." And what does that require?" Fueg asked. Stax wasn't quite sure what to say. Cutting down the occasional oak tree, plucking tufts of tall grass on the lawn didn't seem like the kind of work that would impress a potential business partner. "The house mostly runs itself, to be honest," he said, "as does the business. Really, Mr. Tempero, you should have stopped by our office before your visit. There you would see samples of the minerals we mine, as well as blocks we've shaped and polished. I assure you, your workers are the best in the business. Stonecutter by name, stonecutter by trade. That's what we say." This forced cheerfulness sounded ridiculous to him, but Fueg was rarely listening. "Offices, bah," he said. "Offices are where people go to die. Once they've been given up and accepted what the world thinks they should be. For a collector like me, the home is the key of the understanding of service and soul. So lead on, Mr. Stonecutter." And he gestured out of the house as if their roles were reversed, and Fueg was the one who lived there, and Stax was the visitor asking for the favor. Stax was so flummoxed that before he could quite knew what was happening, he was leading Fueg around the grounds, showing him the alley of birches, pointing out of the fountain's central pillar made of glowstone, which was lit up the lawn at night. Now, if you like, they're probably thinking, "No, Stax, don't. Can't you see this is a horrible mistake?" And without skipping ahead too much, I can tell you that Stax spent many, many lonely nights and anxious days thinking about something very much like that. But Stax had grown up happy and comfortable, without ever hearing or being touched by evil. And like most people who grew up that way, he thought that evil might never would touch him. He would figure out that he was terribly wrong about that. and by then, of course, it would be too late. Fueg was said little during the tour grounds, which made Stax wonder if he were bored. But being in his familiar surroundings made Stax feel more at ease, and slightly less irritated by having a peace interrupted. Anyway, he was generally proud of the estate, from his energetically squawking chickens and multi-hued sheep and the drifts of flowers that carpeted the terrace hills. Before too long, he was enjoying giving the tour, at least a little, and he opened the front door and invited Fueg inside. Cole, Lapis, and Emerald heard the door open and sauntered out of the bedroom, where they had been sleeping in a puddle of sunshine. But all three cats stopped at the sight of Fueg Tempero, their tails suddenly held low. "Hello, kitties," Stax said brightly. "We have a visitor." One of the things about Stax that annoyed the neighbors and workers of the stonecutter office was how Stax seemed as much more at ease talking about his cats than with other people. He was more cheerful with the cats and somehow better at making conversation, even though, as far as the neighbors knew, the cats had never held up their end of the bargain. This time, however, the cats' opinions were clear. Cole hissed at Fueg, their black tails swollen with a bristle brush. "Now, Cole, mind your manners," Stax began, but before he could finish, all three cats shot off in different directions, making themselves scarce. "Huh," Stax said, scratching his head. "I don't know what got into him." "Animals don't like me, and I don't much like them," Fueg said matter-of-factly. "Lead on, Mr. Stonecutter, lead on." Fueg had no more to say about the inside of the house than he had about the grounds. His eyes skittered over paintings and furniture and flowers and pots, betraying no apparent interest, and so Stax led them into the trophy room. "This room is the site of my grandfather spent her very first night here," Stax said. "That was just a hole hacked out of the hillside. Grandmother didn't even have a bed. She huddled inside all night, listening to monsters howl on the other side of the dirt wall, and look at it now." Stax looked proudly around the room and polished diorite and granite walls. The gleaming suits of armor had been belonging to his grandmother and father. The framed blocks of precious metals and symbolized the stonecutter's good fortune. It was a massive map that covered the entire wall. "You should have left the hidey hole as it was," Fueg said, "as a reminder." "Oh, I don't need a reminder," Stax said. "That was what the room was all about." "It's certainly impressive," Fueg said, walking up to the map and craning his neck to see if it was better. His eyes tracing the blue squiggles of rivers through the green swatches of forest and jungle. "But what are all these flags I see on your map?" "Outposts of the family business," Stax said. "Some of the houses, none are as impressive as this one, mind you. Others are little more than hollow-out space with a bed, a furnace, and a crafting table. My father created a network of them for his business dealings." "What a busy man your father was," Fueg said. "What happened to him then?" "He died a few years ago," Stax said. "His boat was lost on a trip back from the southern operations, just a month after grandmother's death. And my mother passed away when I was a boy, so it's just me." "Hard to be all alone in the world with no one to watch out for you," Fueg said. "I miss them every day," Stax said. "But I can take care of myself." "Can you then?" Fueg asked. He wasn't even looking at Stax. He was intently studying the map. He pointed to a green flag in its center. "We're here, are we not?" "That's right. That's the Stonecutter Peninsula. Home. And this would be an ice field that would navigate to reach you," Fueg said, tapping the section of the map just east of the peninsula. "Hazardous seas, Mr. Stonecutter. But of course you know that, seeing how you live so close to the icebergs." "Oh, I've never taken a boat out there. Too dangerous. Too risky." "What would be the purpose of journeying like that, Mr. Tempero?" "To see what particularly at your front door," Fueg said, then shook his head. "Never mind. What about this flag here, up in the orange sea to the north? What must be an interesting spot?" "Badlands, by the look of it." "Never been there either," Stax said, still stiffly. "The folks in your office would tell you more about the outpost, if that's what you're interested in." "It seems you've never been much of anywhere," Fueg said, and Stax opened his mouth to object, thinking that he might have the final straw, and this was a chance to order a disagreeable man to leave. But before Stax could get his word out, Fueg smiled broadly. "But then who can blame you for staying home when you live surrounded by such beauty?" It was the first polite thing Fueg had said. Stax decided to look at the bright side. It was good that the man had finally remembered his manners. Stax nodded modestly, but Fueg had already turned to look out of the back garden, his eyes moving from the pool to the hatch in the lawn. "The hatch leads to the main stonecutter mine," Stax said, a bit reluctant but determined to know what was right for the business. "Would you like to see it?" "Very much so," said Fueg. And Stax led him down to the back door to the backyard, then opened the hatch. He climbed down the ladder and ended on the top of the narrow stone staircase, then waited for Fueg to join him. It was cool below ground, with a faint ripple of breeze rising up the stairs. "This way," said Stax as he picked his way down the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the narrow space. About 10 blocks down, there was a landing with a door and the narrow window looking to the storeroom that contained mining tools and other supplies. From there, the staircase turned descending deeper into the ground, which was no longer enclosed by a wall on the right. Watch your steps. Sometimes visitors get a little disoriented here. Sax watched as Fueg picked up his way behind him. Why would they? Oh, said Fueg, as one hand reached relatively for a wall. Aha. Below them, a vast shaft plunged into the depths. Its opening is 20 blocks wide on each side. The walls rough-hewn stone, with a narrow staircase clinging to them. Down, down, down ran the steps, looking like a thin thread that had been glued to the rock. Torches had been hammered into the walls at regular intervals, and Stax could see the speckles of their orange light down in the darkness. A rising wind made the flames gutter and their clothing ripple. How deep does it go? Fueg asked, his back against the wall. All the way to bedrock, as deep as you can mine, Stax said, then pointed up to the roof. And that's the bottom of the pool, believe it or not. That would make me nervous, sitting over so much nothing, said Fueg. Oh no, it's very safe, Stax said, making a nonchalant step over the edge of the staircase, peering down into the depths. Shouldn't you be careful, Mr. Stonecutter? You might take a bad step. I'm used to it, Stax said. This is my backyard, remember? I spent my teenage years down here, learning the family trade, figuring out the best levels to mine, how to avoid lava and water, techniques for finding the richest veins, those sort of things. I'd be nervous. Someone might give me a push, Fueg said, and Stax's heart jumped to the realization that he turned his back to the strange visitor. He took a hasty step down out of Fueg's reach, but looked up to see the man still had his back pressed against the wall. Stax told himself he was being ridiculous. The man was rude and strange, but he didn't make him a criminal, let alone a murderer. The stonecutter can't be afraid of heights, Mr. Tempero, Stax said, or enclosed spaces for that matter. I can't imagine, Fueg said, taking a cautious peek below them. So this is where the vast stonecutter wealth comes from. Oh, I couldn't call our wealth vast. We have a lot of mines besides this one, Stax said. But yes, this is the first one Grandmother started digging, mostly for coal and diorite. But then she and my mother expanded operations, tunneling all the way down to the bedrock, excavating the mine complex just above it from the central shaft. That's where they're standing in. Tunnels run for hundreds of blocks in every direction. It must be easy to get lost, Flake said. Oh no, it's actually nearly impossible. We have a system, you see. The feeder tunnels are always 2 blocks wide, so you can tell you're in one. And the branch tunnels are a single block wide, and arrayed in grid around the feeder tunnels, like twigs around a tree limb or limbs around a trunk. But really, it's simpler if we go down and see for yourself. Stax beckoned the guest. For a moment, Fueg did look down, out and down, at the line of stairs snaking his way ever lower around the edges around the shaft. Then he paled in retreat to the relative safety of the wall. Surely you should bring a weapon if you're going so darn far here, Fueg said. In grandmother's mine? Stax asked. Oh no, I never carried one. Not when I learned to mine back in the day, and not one inspections now, and no armor either. All that weight would just be a burden, and climbing these stairs is tiring enough. And here I thought you were never reckless, Stax Stonecutter, Fueg said, his eyes glittering. Yet it turns out you were gallivanting through the lightless bowels of the world without so much as a little knife in your hand and a tin pot on your head to keep your skull from getting cracked. Stax laughed. These mines used to be perilous, true. Grandmother would tell tales of fighting skeletons in the dark that would make your hair stand on end. But many caverns were cleared out and sealed off long ago, and the shaft is inaccessible from the outside. Nothing can get in except through the hatch above us, and I assure you, everything is well lit, Mr. Tempero. It wouldn't do to have evil things taking up residence on the premises now, would it? No, I imagine it wouldn't, Fueg said. I thank you for the tour. It has been most informative. And then, without waiting for Stax, he headed up to the narrow staircase. By now, Stax had grown used to the visitor's abrupt manner, and figured it was Fueg's fear of heights that had caused him to retreat to the world of bright sunshine and green grass. As they re-entered the house, Fueg seemed lost in thought. His eyes settled on the well-worn stone pickaxe and blunt sword in the frames. Quite a place of honor to a pair of broken things, he said. Were those your grandmother's? Those were grandmother's. She made them the first night in her dirt hidey hole, Stax explained. Why, they were worn almost down to nothing by the time he hit her first vein of iron. But grandmother never threw anything away. Father put them here to remind us where we come from. Ah, Fueg said, and ran a pale finger over the pitted edge of the blade. I'm sure that seems odd to you, Stax said. For in truth, he always thought the old pickaxe and sword looked shabby, and he thought putting them away in the storeroom and finding something else for the place. Perhaps a bright, cheery painting or an arrangement of flowers. It doesn't seem odd to me at all, Fueg said. In fact, I'd call them the most valuable items in the house. I can't wait for my associates to get a look at them. Associates, Stax asked, who was very much looking forward to getting rid of Fueg. Oh, yes, I just worked with them for years. Very capable fellows, Fueg said, striding through the living room. They're tough in a fight and loyal because I paid them to be. I thought I'd bring them by day after tomorrow. For a moment, Stacks felt like he was falling, but then he got his bearing. They crossed the south line and he shook his head at Fuegin. He hoped in a stern manner. I have to insist that our future dealings go through the office. That will be much more efficient for both of us. But it won't be more efficient, Fueg said, striding down the sandstone stairs of the boathouse dock. It won't be at all. My business is here with you. Stacks wondered what his father would say in this situation, and reluctantly decided he'd say to Fueg temporarily it was difficult and demanding customer, but a customer nonetheless. But it was distasteful, to say the very least, to think the yet more strangers in this house, and another morning spoiled, particularly in Fueg's associates, had become the same deplorable lack of manners as their boss. What if they tracked the mud or stepped on the flowers? No, the day after tomorrow simply won't do, Stack said, stalling for time. I'm frightfully busy, you see. There's much to do in the estate. I simply couldn't clear my schedule. It's quite impossible. Fueg smiled an unpleasant smile, the one that's made Stacks think of a wolf that had cornered a lamb. Yes, it's obvious you're very busy, fellow Stacks, he said. What's on your overflowing to-do list, then? Well, there are cornflowers that need to be planted on the ridge, Stacks said, and the birches need to be trimmed. They're frightfully shaggy. 3 flower pots need to be made, and I don't have any clay in the storeroom, so the whole expedition right there, and well, look right there. A plank on the deck was cracked. Needs replacing. Well, that does seem like a lot of work, Fueg said. How long will these labors take you, do you think? It occurred to Stacks that none of these is Fueg's business, and he shouldn't have discussed any of it with him. But it also occurred to him that it was too late to do anything about it. Oh, that's probably a week, Stacks said, thinking of a week would be surely too long for Fueg to wait. That he would have business elsewhere, and he would leave Stacks in peace, and pretty soon the entire unpleasant morning would fade from memory. But Fueg had smiled and gave Stacks a little bow. A week, then. I'm looking forward to it, Stacks Stonecutter. Stacks forced himself to smile back and say something polite and meaningless as Fueg rearranged his baggy, ill-fitting garments and grasped the oars of his boat. But Stacks wasn't looking forward to it. Not at all. And that is the end of that. So what's kind of nice is, even though we just read 29 pages, this book, if I'm not mistaken, has bigger fonts than the others. So even though we just read 50% more pages, or technically 40% more pages, if I wanted to be mathematical, it actually doesn't feel that bad to the throat. And as a matter of fact, it was nice to read. It might have taken way longer. Like, I started the recording for this at around 10:30, and it's now 11:47. So, I mean, it probably was longer. I don't know. But it was nicer to read on the throat. And trust me, it being chapter by chapter, it gives me more time to space it out. So I don't know how long this recording is, but I'm going to edit it real quick and boo-ba-doo-boo-ba-doo. But yep, next time we're going to read chapters, I don't know, 30 to 46, I believe. And yes, I know I'm doing my numbers wrong by saying this to this or this to this, because we're now on chapter 29, and we're going to, what's it called? Yeah, you know what? You're right. I did do my numbers wrong. So we're reading chapter 29. I'm sorry, I just kind of do numbers. We're doing chapter 29 and going all the way to 47. 47? Or is it 46? And I think it's 47 because I'm stupid. 46. Yep, okay, 29 to 46. Short episode, but hey, you know what? Gets the job done, huh? So, yeah, I hope you guys have a super fantastic, wonderful day. Be polite, be efficient, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.